you may not know this, but those of you who know her well may know her quirky talent is riding a unicycle while twirling a baton. I mean, my goodness, Susan.
Not very well. Not very well.
I mean, just doing it at all is remarkable.
It's a cluster F, trust me.
Well, that's great. So, Susan, welcome to our virtual author event. It's a pleasure to see you again, and I'm delighted you're here.
Well, sorry guys, we were a little late. It was my tech wreck. You know, when you're over 30, you have a few quirks with modern technology. So my apologies. Thanks for the introduction, Patricia.
You're welcome, Susan. And you as a role model of stick-to-itness, you know, we weren't going to let a little tech get us down.
No, never.
So Susan wanted to know if the audience wanted the tender reading tonight, or to start with, or the kind of, you know, the little naughty one. And I think I heard the naughty one, and I hope that you get to hear that, audience, because it's great. It's hilarious. So while we're waiting for the answer to come in as to what the audience would like, Susan, let's just jump right in there about the Beautiful Misfits.
Okay.
Could you tell us just a little bit, please, about what was the inspiration for you writing the Beautiful Misfits?
The inspiration was, I have a son who is now 30. I guess you would classify him as a millennial, a young millennial, and his addictions were mainly alcohol and Xanax, maybe some kava and kratom, which is really prevalent now, and it is legal and horrifying. He was always scared of opiates and the things that could be laced with fentanyl, which is what's really killing all the young people and older people today. You know, you go out on the street, you think, oh, I'm flying, my doctor won't prescribe me a Xanax, I need one Xanax. And, you know, that one hit could be your last breath because it's laced with fentanyl. And my son had several friends who died of overdose. Good kids, great kids. They died from overdoses because what they got out in the streets, you know, for friends, whatever. And the friends, you know, they didn't know it was laced with fentanyl, and that's what's causing people to drop dead. So I'm a huge advocate for carrying Narcan, and fentanyl test strips should be available for everyone. You know, we're not going to cure the epidemic, but we can curtail the deaths by having those things on hand. And that's the heavy part. The light part is it's set at the makeup counters where all the women are crazy and fun.
Well, you described how you actually have worked at a makeup counter. And could you tell us a little bit about setting the scene? Were you taking notes secretly behind the scenes?
Gosh, yes. You know, every time I went to the stock room to fill up on lipsticks and powders, I would be in my iPhone. I might be low tech, but I do know how to use the notes. And I would write, okay, we have a customer. She's 95 and she has 8 dates a day, and she is buying our lifting and firming creams, not for her face, but to lift her boobs so that they don't look like trout on a trot line. So literally she would buy the lifting and firming creams for her breasts. We made a lot of money off of her.
Well, she had a lot of dates, you said. So, you know,
she really had 3 a day. She would do a morning date, a lunch date, and an evening date.
3 square meals a day, 3 squares. Yeah. 3 squares, right? Yeah. Well, the audience has resoundingly returned with a vote of naughty.
Of course they did. It must be my friends on here. Or, okay, we'll start with naughty. But to answer your question about why I worked for the makeup counter, and this first excerpt is from the makeup counter, the naughty. I had lost my job as a columnist and reporter for 30 years almost at Gannett. And in one of their multiple layoffs, I was laid off while I was on vacation. And somebody said, "Why don't you do makeup?" And I thought, yeah, okay. I did makeup in college for cheap beer and pizza, but I trained in New York with Lancome, and it was the best 5 years I've had that I can remember. So this scene is with an older lady who she's just used Pond's or, oil of Olay. She's new at the makeup counter. She's in her 80s. So I'll read from that first. The client's eyes were closed when she returned, and snores puttered from her lips. "Ma'am?" Josie tapped her shoulder. The woman startled. "Sorry, I hope it was a good dream." "Oh, yes," she moaned. "I was laying on the beach without a stitch of clothing, and along comes this glorious naked man who—" I better shut my mouth. "Maybe I ought to let you go back to sleep," Josie said, smiling as she set the cotton pads, cleanser, and face chart on the small island counter. "Do you mind giving me your name? We can go over the how-to guide once we have you looking young as a co-ed." "Wilma Youngblood, widowed and ready for romance." She popped open her mouth as if shocked by her own words. "I'm almost 90, and let me tell you, a woman's needs don't disappear. Ye old thatched cottage doesn't seal its roof, if you know what I'm saying." She slapped her thigh and laughed. Josie fell in love with Wilma Youngblood on the spot. "If you're going to start trolling for men, let's get those hands soft as kittens. I'm going to give you a heavenly hand massage." "I'd rather be giving a handsome fellow a heavenly hand job," she said. Josie heard a honk of laughter. Monica had returned from lunch and decided Miss Youngblood was far more entertaining than trying to sell Clinique Moisture Surge. They exchanged a wide-eyed glance, the kind that says, "Stick around, we're about to get a show." Josie needed to steer Wilma down another lane before lower-level manager called security on the woman. "That's a wonderful handbag," she said, of Wilma's vintage crocodile purse, which she clutched as if protecting a baby. "I'll need to put it somewhere safe before we start." After storing the bag, Josie mixed the Manos Suavos with a spritz of on-floor perfume, heavy and cloying with the scent of gardenias. "The hands have a lot of nerves and pleasure points. I'm going to treat you today before we start on your face." Wilma Youngblood held out her ancient arm, clanking with bracelets, and she waved her gnarled fingers, strangled in diamonds. "It's like that church I used to go to," she said, "where they always want to wash my feet. I'd just as soon show people my little cottage as my goat hooves." Josie heard Monica laughing nearby, and she squeezed a lotion bottle so hard a glob shot out, pale pink cream landing on Wilma's scarf. "Gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me blot that for you, or you can take it off and I'll have it laundered for you." "You think I'm going to let you yank this off and show you my traffic stoppers? I wear scarves so the men don't stare at my offerings." She shimmied like an adult dancer. When Josie reached for Miss Youngblood's other hand, the woman stopped her. "I don't see a ring on that finger," she said, pointing to Josie's bare left hand. "Pretty thing like you oughtn't be single." "I was married for 20 years, Josie said. Gosh, that was almost half her life with Frank. I promised myself no more men until I got a few things straight with myself first. Was it the sex? Wilma asked, and Josie blushed. You young people need to realize exactly how we oldies made even the impossible work in our days. Let me tell you this in case you happen upon another fellow. She reached for Josie's arm and drew her closer. Never turn your husband away. I don't care how tired you are. I don't care if the cat box is full of litter or the baby's diaper weighs more than the television. You young people need to realize men are simple and only need 3 things. And what are those, Miss Youngblood? Josie figured she'd say something along the lines of the good Lord, a good woman, and the need to be right. The 3 essential things a man needs, Miss Youngblood said, her voice building, are food, fucks, and a TV turned to ball games. That's the naughty one.
Well, you heard it here, folks.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
like a
sorry.
recipe. That's like a good recipe. It's just like the basics. You and Mary Berry.
It is so misogynistic and it's so sexist, but in her day, that's how it was. Do I condone that? No, but is it funny? To me, it was. And I actually had her as a customer.
Well, I love that reading, and I think it is not only hilarious, but she is a woman of her times. I mean, that's one of the great parts.
She's older than the automobile. I think. I'm bad at math.
But you're great at humor, and you're a lovely writer, and you know how to draw fantastic characters, which leads me, you're welcome. So I would love to ask you about creating these characters. I know that there may be some that are composites. There could be some that you completely made up, but how do you create these characters and put the literary flesh on the bone?
Well, you have to be a kook magnet. And I am a kook magnet. I mean, my husband will tell you, anybody who knows me, if there's a kook within a 200-mile radius, they're going to attach to me like, lint on black clothing. So I observe people. I listen to people. I was one of those, mall watchers, somebody who would sit downtown or in a mall or in a store on a bench and just take notes. And I'm from the South. I grew up in Georgia, but my family's from South Carolina. So we have a lot of colorful people highlighting our DNA. And I do base some characters on these relatives, and they're so happy. They don't care.
Do you, when you're creating these characters, do you like to read aloud to kind of create their dialogue, or?
No, I hate my voice. I sound like Ellie Mae Clampett. I will never read aloud. I almost just needed a voiceover actress to do this. I don't want to hear it. No.
So
I read aloud in my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the secret to writing this kind of dialogue that moves between, like the tender or the naughty, the body, the serious? What are your techniques?
The secret is you cannot absolutely do it flippantly or abruptly. You segue your way into it by using setting, the scene, and the dialogue and character description. I would never do a complete about face, but people have said that if I have any talent, the talent would be that I can take a serious subject and infuse it with humor without, compromising the plight of the issue. So I don't know how I do it. I guess it's just being a crazy person.
We're going to get to your writing practice and your techniques and things like that in a little while, because I know the audience is interested in that. But let's get to a little bit more about the book. In the Beautiful Misfits, you've got a slow burn romance. Now, did
Yes.
you have that already planned? Because the slow burn is an approach, and there are different kinds. But how did you settle on slow burn?
Well, Patricia, it's so cool you asked that, because when you were raised by my parents who are in their 80s and still alive, you're not going to throw some erotica out there and write a full-on sex scene. Mom is 84 and dad is almost 88. And dad was in the corporate world for years, but then when he retired, he thought, I'm just going to be a lay preacher. And he preaches and teaches Sunday school at a Methodist church. And I'm going to either get a pen name or wait for them to die to do anything but slow burn. And that's interesting, because my next novel, which is actually coming out pretty soon, is called Rebound for Rent, and it's my first romantic comedy, and it has a sex scene in it. So I may use a pen name. It's not graphic, but it is kind of yummy.
Diane Gabaldon, who's of Outlander, right?
Yes.
Has talked about writing sex scenes and how to create different kinds of tension, and this is not a pun, but I'm going to say it anyway, what to keep in and what to leave out. If you know what I mean?
Love that. I love it.
So when you're writing romance, or when you're kind of trying to create that tension, what inspires you, or what have you read that makes that possible for you to create that tension between two characters?
Well, that's interesting. I love rom-coms, and I love Sophie Kinsella and Sophie Renaud and Sophie Cousins and all the Sophies, who are brilliant English writers. We have some great romantic comedy writers in this country too. So I just wanted to be funny. I was tired of heavy topics, and I read a whole bunch of rom-coms. And for the sex part and sex doesn't have to be graphic. In fact, I like it better when it's just sensual, and the tension, like the hand, he put his hand on my jaw, and, she's flaming up and about to, it just feels like a cardiovascular furnace with 8 logs on it. I read Colleen Hoover, who is like all over the bestseller list. And I love Taylor Jenkins Reid, who did Daisy Jones and the Six. And my favorite was the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So I read a lot of writing that would do off the page sex that was sensual without using graphic terms.
So you're kind of the school of a little less is more.
I would think so. But when mom and dad go to their great reward, they bought their mausoleums when they were in their 50s, and their names are on the plaque, and they go by there and they take pictures. I'll send you one. Like, they photograph themselves by the mausoleum. Will I ever write a real sex scene? Well, I have a novel in progress that's romantic suspense, and I wrote 2 real sex scenes, and I read them to my husband. He goes, you cannot put that in a book. I thought they were pretty good. I got lucky that night after he read them.
Well, then I think that's actually the real answer.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think, what is that old saying? Don't listen to what people say, watch what they do.
Yes.
I think you got the answer.
But Patricia, I do agree with you that less is more. I mean, so many of the romance books, and I used to say, I will never write any romance. I'm just going to write literary fiction, book club fiction. but I was tired of heavy topics, so I wanted to write. The book is called Rebound for Rent, and it's about a woman down on her luck who lived in a big mansion and finds herself in a storage facility living after her husband got with Ms. North Carolina, who had left him for Ms. Rhode Island. It's all a calamity confusion thing with LGBTQ elements. And so that's when I started reading a lot of the rom-coms. And they make you happy, you know? I mean, I love literary fiction. You know, the reason I became a writer was Ann Tyler and Barbara Kingsolver, but sometimes I just need my mind to blank out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm interested also in the setting, using Asheville to kind of help shape this story. So how did you use or deploy Asheville to really shape the story in the Beautiful Misfits?
Asheville has always been, since the early, probably 1900s, I'm not sure the exact date, but a destination of healing and wellness. You know, it was the place that you recovered from TB, and that's where all the, probably the bed and breakfast in Montford and other places used to be big houses for those recuperating from tuberculosis. And then as time went on, Asheville became the destination for those suffering from mental and emotional angst. I mean, you come here and you're accepted. There's a thriving art scene, and it just seems like an inclusive environment. And you know, the mountains are around us, and they're almost like a warm, comforting hug. And I think the people in the area are like that too. They're pretty progressive. So that's why I wanted to use that particular scene in the Beautiful Misfits as a metaphor for the healing that the characters go through.
Well, that seems like a pretty nice transition to the more tender part of the book that you had mentioned you would read for us this evening.
Okay. I got to redeem myself for the naughtiness.
That's a balance. It's a balance.
I know it is. Let me have a drink of water. I'm so hoarse.
That's
Okay.
all right. And listeners and audiences out there, we didn't say that Susan was yelling at anybody and that's why she got hoarse, like her own computer.
Oh, I was yelling.
So yeah, we're not trying to give anything away.
At the basketball games. I might have to put on 2 pairs of glasses. The sun is dimming here.
Okay, do what you got to do.
I can like double up. Do you mind?
No, in fact, it makes you even quirkier, and I love it.
Okay. This is the scene where the main character, he has overdosed and he's in the hospital. But don't worry, the book has a happy ending. I'm not going to write anything that makes you feel like you've swallowed a boat anchor, and you leave like heavy. So here it is, the hospital scene. In the early morning of the second day at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, Josie startled, remembering where she was. She jumped from the reclining chair a nurse had brought the night before and rushed to Finley's side, same as she'd done those newborn weeks when she rarely left his cradle, checking his breathing throughout the night, so if Sid's tried to steal him, she'd be there for a fight. Sid's is sudden infant death syndrome. If there'd been a change, she'd slept through it. But had she slept? The night had been punctuated by the ins and outs of doctors, technicians, nurses checking vitals, and Josie dozing but never full asleep. She stretched her cramped legs and yawned, her exhaustion bolstered with adrenaline, wired and tired. Part of the night and into the morning, she read to him from her journals. She stepped closer and lifted his hand, careful not to disturb the IV. She brought his warm wrist to her lips where she could feel his pulse, a slow bass drum, each beat with its dreadful pause before the next. Finley's monster had entered on tiptoes, back when he was young and drug-free with a sports future all but guaranteed. He never summoned his demon. Big Pharma pushed it, doctors prescribed it, and genetics pollinated it. Come on, sweet child, Josie said, and gently returned his hand, fearing any movement on her part could affect an outcome. Wake up and show them how strong you are. I'm going to keep reading until they kick me out to do more tests. It's going to be fine, Finley. You've got this. You have it in you, so fight. Josie grabbed an extra blanket from a small closet and placed it over her son. Who knew if he could feel discomfort? But after all this time worrying if he was cold or hungry, it seemed the right thing to do. These small acts of love she wasn't allowed for so long. I love you, Finley. I wish I could make this all better. But for now, I'm just going to keep reading to you. I'm going to start with what I wrote last night. It's the first entry I've made in this journal in nearly 20 years. So here's the entry. I get a little emotional because this part is close to home. My darling son, the machines do the work, the breathing. If they go, you go. This much they said. This much I'm struggling to believe. In the weeks after you were born, I'd kneel at your cradle and watch you breathe. Every night after you fed from my body and lay dry and cocooned, I counted your breaths. I had to, because sometimes you'd hesitate as if unsure what came next. 1, 2, 3. 1, skip. 2, 1, skip, skip. I'd nudge the cradle and startle you into another gasp of existence. I did this every night until my knees grew raw on the cold hardwood floor and my sleep-starved eyes shut down. It seemed you were hesitant about this life outside of me, not sure you wanted the air that sustained. Almost it was testing this world before it had a chance to do the same to you. Sometimes I never made it to my bed across the room. I'd awaken in a spill of moonlight, clumped and aching beneath your cradle, mouth dry and hanging open, foot kicking that oak siding just to keep you going. Now, more than 23 years later, I'm doing it again. We're back to this two-step, this tango, this breathing game. I am counting the rise and falls of your chest and gently tapping the metal railings of your bed. The machine breathes and releases. It's a dance, a rhythm. They tell me different things. One doctor says you're wanting to wake up, which is a good sign. Another says it's too early to assess the extent of the damage. That one uses words like possible kidney failure or brain injury. God only knows what else this monster's seduction has delivered. Finley, I want you to know something. So I'm going to lean over your bed and whisper it in your ear. I kept a diary for you from the moment of conception. It started that first day I knew life bloomed beneath my heart until you were 4, maybe 5. I'll be nudging you as I did all those years ago as the lights flicker and the machines beat and the air rushes through tubes, hissing and beating and sustaining all I hold dear in a single current. That's the serious part.
Those are tenuous moments when you're
They
looking at the fragility of life. And I I
two
love
pairs
that.
of glasses. I could see the print. I don't know why my publisher had small print, but it got the pages out there, so I'm grateful.
There you go. That's the spirit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in your hot take on rehab, because certainly rehab programs or rehab facilities are ubiquitous. They're in our lives now more than ever, and they're a part of this story. And of course, the great humorist and former Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher, made the best act of her life as a humorist like you and great writer, talking about her own addiction and recovery and times in the, as she used to call it, the bin.
The
So-
bin, the loony bin, the nut hut. I call it the nut hut.
Well, I like that. I like it. So what do you think about rehab as a literary space, as a setting, and how did you tackle that?
Traditional rehabs, I researched this for more than 5 years. I had family members who went to rehab and they would either quit or come back. And most rehabs are very singular. They offer one modality of treatment, which is the 12 steps, which is great. It's, AA, NA has helped millions of people get sober, but it's also not for everybody. It's really not for the majority, the studies have shown. And the rehab I created in the Beautiful Misfits, it is utopic. Some people say it would be easy to do. Other people say it would be hard, but it offers more of a cafeteria approach to getting sober. There's harm reduction, moderation, and the most important, there are medications to stop cravings, to block the high, to save lives. And a lot of rehabs today don't use those methods. And I think medication, along with cognitive behavioral therapy and the other types of therapy, are very important. Medication plays a huge role. And, I'm not like, let's medicate everybody, but some people need the medicine, like to block the high so they'll quit craving it. It works for some people. So the rehab I've created has different paths for recovery. There's not just one path, and that's where we're missing the boat. There are many paths.
Was there a moment where you realized, I have to write this book? Is there ever a time when you come to an idea or an issue and you say, first of all, I have to write this, and second, there's something hilarious here?
Well, I knew the makeup counters were hilarious. And, every day, I had a kid, and back when I wrote this, he was in his mid-20s, and I personally went to funerals of his friends, young women, young men, and their moms. They were devastated. So I knew that I had to look into what's offered, why is the drug epidemic and the death rate so high? And so that's why I spent so long researching it. Plus, I'm a procrastinator. A little bit of both.
So in thinking about your approach to humor, and I've heard you say this, not everybody thinks something is funny. Humor,
Right.
it's people think humor is very subjective, but how did you find your humor voice in writing? And part two of this is, who are your humor inspirations?
Well, I grew up with a sort of quacky Daffy family. We grew up on a lake. Well, we grew up right outside of Atlanta in a little town on the Alabama line, and we had a boat, and I would go fishing and water skiing, and just everybody in that tiny town just had a story. I mean, people had the most outlandish and interesting stories. And I just knew that I wanted to tell those, and that mostly they were funny. Even if you were writing about a funeral or, a murder case, there would be outlandish things that would happen in court or at the funeral. And I just knew that the Southern way of handling the difficult topics with humor was what I wanted to tap into. Is that the first part?
That's the first part. There's nothing like getting the two-part question. So thanks a lot, Patricia.
Yeah. So the second part, I think you asked, were the influences.
Right.
So maybe I don't need the nursing home. I remember the second part. I don't have to go to Croker's rest home. The influences, like I said, were Ann Tyler. She's a Baltimore writer, and she's won the Pulitzer. She's mainly literary fiction, but her work is also straddles the commercial line. And for humor, my favorite book of all time, and I read this in my early 20s and wanted to just be that writer. It was called A Confederacy of Dunces. Some people don't get the humor in that. I mean, it's like got the most mixed reviews.
Yeah, but I love it. I love that book. It's unique.
Ignatius Riley with his diatribe on modern society and capitalism. It was the best satire I've ever read.
I have to agree. And it was so fresh and so full of pathos, and you could see this the suffering, but also the humor, and like you're saying, the satire, but also this kind of the absurdity of life. I liked
when he ate all the hot dogs and he wrote the Pants Factory, all those letters. So that that humor. And I love David Sedaris and Celia Rivenbark. She's a good friend of mine, and we wrote humor columns together. She was with the Wilmington Star, and I was with the Citizen Times, and we would meet at award ceremonies, and I just love her books. I think her last one was something like, Bellwether's Raining Hissy Fits, and she wrote Bless Your Heart Tramp was her first one, which was great.
I feel like a lot of us have said that, or some version of Tramp. Bless your heart, comma, fill in the space. If in our hearts, in our minds, or maybe out loud many times.
Yeah. Maybe in a hushed tone, Patricia, like Tramp. My mom calls it hussy.
Hussy, I've heard that.
Yeah.
I definitely have heard that. Being from the South, I'm from North Carolina. I certainly have heard the word hussy.
What part are you from, Patricia?
I'm from Charlotte.
Well, you don't hear it. That's a refined city. When you're from a small town, you hear a lot of euphemisms for hoe.
Now, my dad was a farmer from a farming family in Stanley County, and my mother was from a tobacco family. She was the youngest of 13 in Stokes County.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they brought the, let's call it the country way of living to the big city.
How long have you been in Asheville?
I've been in Asheville since 2001.
Well, you're indoctrinated then.
I feel fully immersed. I definitely do. Let's talk a little bit about your writing practice. Now, you've got this, deep background in journalism and columnist and reporting. So what is your practice in getting these books out? You've got another one coming out. How do you structure a day? Do you write every day? What do you need? Some matcha tea and some sage? What are you doing over there?
Well, let's see. Actually, it's really hard because I'm a procrastinator, but every November, this is what gets me jump started. Every November is National Novel Writing Month, and it's really caught on. You've probably heard of it. You have 30 days to get the shitty first draft of a novel down on paper. And, I've always wanted to win, and I've always been really good with a deadline. So it gives me a deadline. So I get that crappy first draft done during NaNo, National Novel Writing Month, and spend the rest of the year rewriting it 100 million times. So I wake up and now I work 3 days a week as an autism behavioral therapist, but just 12 hours a week. So on those days that I don't, I get up about 8 and make some peanut butter toast with lots of peanut butter and jelly and a cup of coffee, and then do the Wordle and send my husband pictures if I get it in 2, and I don't tell him if I miss it. And then once I've checked the Murdaugh murders and People Crime News and the stock market, then I start writing. Sometimes I go down a rabbit hole, but mostly I try to start at 10. And then if I'm working on a project, I might work until 7, 10 to 7.
Do you write on a computer? Are you longhand? What's that process
I used to do longhand when I first started out. The first novel I ever wrote was on a yellow legal pad. It was called The Duke of Habit. It was about a man that I was in love with that had tremendous OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was crap. So, I mean, as time evolved, I used to do the typewriter and then the Brother word processor, and now I might take notes longhand, but mostly just a laptop.
So you don't even, do you revise in the computer too? There's no printing out and then revising?
I should print it out. That would be the thing to do and read it aloud, but I can't stand to see my work physically because I want to go in and, if I wasn't given a deadline by a publisher, I would keep editing it. Like Sarah Gruen, who wrote Water for Elephants, she said they have to pull her away. She would keep revising. And I feel like it could go on until eternity. Just like, no, it's not right. No, it's not right. I'm going to do one more draft. There comes a point you just have to say, send it out.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
We've got some questions from the audience, and please, audience, if you have some more questions, or we have time for those. This question is from Randy. How long did it take to write the Beautiful Misfits? And you've answered this part. Do you write at the same time every day when you're writing a book? So I think we've answered that, but how long did it take you?
Hi, Randy. It took, I was working as a makeup artist for Lancome at the time, and I would, retail hours are awful, weekends, nights. So it took me researching the rehabs and doing everything I needed to do, just writing part-time. It took 5 years.
And was your breakthrough where you were willing to let it go and say, all right, I'm done? Was that when your publisher wrenched it from your hands, or are you better now at just saying, okay, take it?
No, I'll never get better. It's a total disorder. But I did send Rebound for Rent, my new rom-com. I just sent it out everywhere just the past 2 weeks. With the Beautiful Misfits, I probably sent it to 5 or 6 publishers and got 3 offers, and then chose Regal House. And then they had me, they're a great publisher, they had me do another edit. So it was like, I couldn't look at it. In fact, I hated, I'm tired of it. I love my book, but I'm tired of it. I've seen it so many times. Well, as far as me, if I read it, Patricia, I'll go in and say, I need to change this.
Yes. You step gently away from the book.
But I am grateful that it's getting really good reviews, and it seems to be going well. And you have to step back from something you've created. I'm sure if I look at it in a year, I'll think, yeah, I did it. But it's so close to home right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it hard to receive a critique or call for rewrites? And is there anything that, if not for the Beautiful Misfits or one of your previous books, where you just said, I'm not doing that?
Well, there's always a bed to crawl under with a blanket and a pillow. I call it turtling. I think over the years, I started this when I was maybe I started writing books when I was 30, when my son was born, and rejections, acceptances, the ups and downs. I developed, the armadillo sort of coat of armor. So rejections, they don't really bother me anymore. They used to. Now it's, well, another one, I'm closer to an acceptance. Every writer has them.
And what about rewrites and suggestions for, for example, if somebody says, oh, this should have some flashbacks or something like that.
Oh, I'm super receptive. In fact, I'm in a critique group, and I hired beta readers who read the drafts, and then you look at what they say, and a lot of it is really, really good advice, what you need to do. And some of it is pretty stupid, but most of it is excellent advice. And for the final product, I usually hire an agent editor to do it, just to say, is this marketable? And you have to pay them, but they'll let you know.
Straight on, they'll give you the unvarnished truth.
Yeah, but they try to coat it in an outer thing of buttercream frosting, and then you get the crickets inside the cake.
I love buttercream frosting, but
I know.
Got a question from Jennifer about characters. Are there characters that you create from your imagination, or do you and another part of this could be, could someone recognize themselves in your book or books?
I try to mask them in lots of different traits that you wouldn't normally associate with a person. Like one of my characters, who was anorexic in the novel, in real life, she was zoftig, would be the word. She was a healthy gal, as my dad would say. And to answer the questions, I love to completely make up characters, but I also love to draw on the people that I have met and just inflate all of their characteristics.
Do you think that someone might stumble across your book and say, are you like Thomas? You're not like Thomas Wolfe, right? Where people are like, that's me.
It happened with my very first book. It was called Not Tonight, Honey, Wait Until I'm a Size 6. And it was a book of humorous essays. And this woman that was in my sorority, and by the way, I didn't like being in a sorority. I finally quit because I wasn't the type. She definitely recognized herself and called me up from Atlanta on the phone and let me have it.
And how did you respond?
I felt bad. That was the only time.
You've been more careful since then.
Well, or either that or people are just more open-minded. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
I better knock on wood. Who knows what's going to come out of this one? People might. Is that me at the makeup counter? Oh my gosh, you shouldn't have.
And then you just said, well, of course not. I saw tens of hundreds of people.
That's my aunt. That's not you. They said on my Aunt Betty.
When you're there's a question here, do you wake up at night and write things down?
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's like a piece of fabric. there is a place between wakefulness and sleep that's like the hem of semi-consciousness. And that right there is the fertile ground for ideas. So I keep my cell phone by the bed on the notes, and I think, oh, I have this brilliant idea. Oh my gosh, this should be this. Type it in the notes. Try to go back to sleep. Wake up the next morning. 90% of the time, it is awful, just awful. But 10% of the time is where my nice nuggets come from. So it does work, just not consistently.
Knowing that, here's a question from Sherry. Knowing that this book is based on parts of, and this is in quotes, your real life son's experiences, how has he received the way you perceived him?
My son and I had a great relationship until he hit his late teens. And then it was up and down. It was estranged at some point, but I never gave up. Mainly, like I said, his addictions were kava and kratom, which is legal. They're kava bars, and a lot of people are dying from kava and kratom now. It's not regulated. It's a legal drug. So he understands that the character is a composite, that he was the impetus for the addiction story. I don't think he's read the whole thing. But he and I have a great relationship now. I took him we went on our first adult mother-son trip. We went to Yellowstone last May before the floods, and we're going to go to a bunch of other parks this late summer. So we're going to continue to do mother-son trips, and he's been sober for many years.
Yellowstone's great, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I thought I would like
Beautiful.
fall into one of the hot pools and be disintegrated.
Oh, no, not that. Well, tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about, like you mentioned your book that's coming up. What's next?
After Rebound for Rent, it is the suspense, my first suspense novel. And I wrote it, the shitty first drafter, in Nano in November, this past November. And I need to do another draft. That's what I'll be working on. It's about a woman whose husband leaves her 2 hours after they're married and dies. But then she goes to St. John in the Virgin Islands and thinks she sees him buying shrimp at a little market. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Are you reading a lot of, or did you read a lot of mystery or suspense or anything to get you in the mindset? Any recommendations?
Well, I need to read more since it's just the first draft. But I do like Lisa Jewell and Gillian Flynn and what's her name? She did Stillhouse Lake. So I do read in the suspense genre some, but mostly my preference is book club fiction, which I think the Beautiful Misfits is more book club fiction. I like literary fiction, but I need it to have some momentum, not just beautiful writing.
Do you, with all of the writing that you're doing and the work that you do you have any time to watch movies or stream anything? And
Sure.
one of our audience members wants to know, what are you watching, or movies or characters that inspire
So my
you?
favorite ever was Breaking Bad, and Wentworth is on Netflix. It's like Orange is the New Black, but it's an Australian show, and there were 8 seasons. And I mean, I just binge all the time on Netflix when I'm tired of writing. I can go days watching. We're watching New Amsterdam, which is the medical drama set in a New York public hospital. There are tons of shows. I watched Manifest and Stranger Things, and it's sad how many, it's sad how much I've watched on the streaming channels. A lot.
Do you think you'll ever break genre and do something along the lines of science fiction, horror, dark
No.
fantasy?
My
Under a pen
husband,
name?
well, I'm breaking genre with this suspense that has the sex scene. I think my pen name will be my middle name Lee and my new last name Laws. So I might use Lee Laws, which sounds kind of like Lee Laws, to do the one I'm working on now. So those are all in the women's fiction book club sort of umbrella, but they are different subgenres. You know, you have women's fiction, romantic comedy, and then romantic suspense. And but what I do, fantasy or science fiction, I mean, I love The Handmaid's Tale. That's one of my favorite novels by Margaret Atwood. And I love the show, still watching that. But could I write in that genre? I absolutely would be lost.
You know what, Susan? I think you're about up for anything you put your
Not
mind
that.
to. Yeah, and I think of that like What Lies Beneath with Michelle Pfeiffer and Harrison Ford. What a great,
Oh, yes.
isn't that great?
Yeah. And
Scary, kind of spooky, supernatural element. But we got started a little late, but we triumphed over tech. So
yes,
that's
my
something
fault. My fault. Sorry. I was upside down, which is a metaphor, really.
It was one of the more entertaining tech challenges we've had. But if you were thinking back of all the, let's close out with what's one of the best pieces of writing advice you've ever received?
It sounds like a cliche, but don't give up and write every day if you can, because a lot of people say, yeah, I've got a book in me, and they probably do, but they don't sit down and do it. And I always tell people that say, I've got a book, I want to write a book. If you did 1 page a day, which is just 250 words, 1 page a day for a year, you'd have 350 pages of a shitty first draft. And then the first draft's the hardest. Then you can go back in and put the meat and the muscle on the bone. So you have to make yourself do it and not take rejection to heart.
Well, those are the sage words from author and humorist Susan Reinhardt, who has triumphed over technological travails. I'm trying to draw inspiration from you and do some alliteration there, Susan. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us for this fantastic virtual author event. Thank you, audience.
You, Patricia.
Well,
Thanks
it's my
for
pleasure.
coming, guys. Thank you. Look at my earrings. Do you want to see?
Yes.
They're the book Misfits. Cover. Etsy does book cover earrings.
Adorable. And we want to thank you all, and please support independent bookstores like Malaprops. You can purchase the Beautiful Misfits from Malaprops in the store or online. And if you are traveling around, you can go to indiebound.org and find out what the independent bookstore near you might be. So you never know, you might see Susan out there taking some notes.
Well, I'm on IndieBound and I support the independent booksellers. So if you can buy from them instead of Amazon, it helps everyone.
True.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you,
for
audience.
having me. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.